Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has died. His office says he passed away following a brief and sudden illness. In a Truth Social post, President Donald Trump called Graham one of the greatest people and senators he has ever known.
The President of the United States could barely hold his composure on Sunday morning, and the reason had almost nothing to do with politics. He had spoken to Lindsey Graham only hours before the senator collapsed, and he could not stop replaying every word of that final call inside his own head. A man who almost never lets the country see him shaken sounded genuinely broken, and what he revealed about that conversation sent a chill through everyone listening. Trump kept coming back to it on Sunday morning, calling into one television studio after another, and every single time he described the same haunting thing. He had spoken to Lindsey Graham in the early evening on Saturday, the 11th of July, sometime around 7 o'clock, and the senator had sounded exactly like himself. Graham had just landed off a long flight. He was already chasing votes for a bill he cared about. And he told the president, in that eager voice everyone in Washington knew so well, that they were all set for the Save America Act. Trump told him it was a long way to travel and that they would get it done together. Then they hung up, and neither man had the slightest reason to believe it was the last conversation they would ever share. What made the president's voice go heavy on live television was the terrible math he could not stop doing inside his own head. He realized that the call had probably happened only minutes, maybe an hour before Graham collapsed. In front of the cameras on Sunday morning, he said the words that froze people right there in their kitchens. It could have been his last call, he admitted. And he did not know exactly. He said the loss was devastating. He said Graham was like a member of the family to him, and that it was very tough. For a man who almost never lets the public watch him unravel, the crack running through his usual armor was impossible to miss. He kept circling back to one strange and tender detail that clearly gnawed at him. Graham had sounded tired, nothing more than tired, and Trump, replaying every second of it, said that other than being worn out from the trip, the man had seemed completely fine, which is exactly the thing that makes a death like this so cruel for the people left holding the phone afterwards. He even offered a quiet and slightly awkward comfort to himself on air, saying that maybe going that suddenly is not the worst way for a person to go. You could hear a man trying to make peace with something in real time, in front of an entire country, before he had a single real answer to hold on to. A message reached him in the dead of night, somewhere around 1 in the morning, from someone inside Graham's office. And just like that, a friendship that had survived public insults and betrayals and a full decade of history was simply over. But to understand why Trump sounded like he had lost blood, you have to see where Lindsey Graham had been standing barely a day before that phone ever rang. Only one day earlier, Graham had looked about as alive as a man of 71 possibly can. He was in Kiev, in the middle of an active war, and he was practically glowing. This was his 10th trip into Ukraine since the full invasion began, and the Ukrainians treated him like one of their own blood. President Zelensky greeted him warmly. Graham toured a factory that builds attack drones, and he stood there holding an interceptor built to hunt Russian machines out of the sky, grinning like someone who had just been handed the keys to something dangerous and wonderful. He said it would be a huge mistake for America not to work with Ukraine in the drone business, because these were the people who had learned, out of pure desperation, how to fight a far larger enemy and win small miracles almost every day. Then he stood in front of a row of burned-out Russian tanks and delivered the announcement of his life. He told reporters that roughly 30 minutes earlier, he had reached an agreement with the White House on the Russia sanctions bill they would finally support, and he said plainly that this meant the thing was going to become law. He looked straight into the cameras and said he had never been more optimistic than he was on that afternoon, that there was finally a real formula to end the war. He spoke about a magic moment in time, about squeezing Vladimir Putin until continuing the war became impossible for him. Sometimes the very best day and the very last day turn out to be the same day, and nobody standing in the room has the faintest idea it is happening. Graham was not winding down. He was not some tired old man shuffling quietly toward retirement. He had just pulled off the exact thing he had been chasing for more than a year. He was surrounded by allies who genuinely adored him, and he was already thinking 3 moves ahead on the board. Then he climbed onto a plane and flew all the way back across the ocean to Washington. He landed, he called the president about his voter law, He sounded tired in the way anyone alive would after a journey like that. And he went home to his house on Capitol Hill. He had no idea, and neither did anyone who loved him, that the countdown had already quietly started the moment his feet touched American soil again. The emergency call came in around 8:30 on Saturday evening. Someone at Graham's home on Capitol Hill was suffering from chest pains, and crews were sent racing across the city toward him. What the radio traffic later revealed is the kind of detail that turns a cold headline into something you feel low in your own chest. Within about 25 minutes, the situation had collapsed from bad into unthinkable. The chest pains had become a full cardiac arrest, and the crews were already deep into compressions, fighting for a heartbeat that was steadily slipping away from them. A neighbor watched the whole thing unfold from her own window and did what ordinary people do now, quietly recording a moment she would never be able to forget. Around 9:30, a man was wheeled out of that house on a stretcher and lifted into a waiting ambulance while police cars and fire trucks crowded the entire street. He was rushed to George Washington University Hospital in the same city and on the same night as a man who had been laughing inside a war zone barely a day before. And somewhere inside that hospital, quietly, the fight finally ended. His office released only a few carefully chosen sentences in the small hours of Sunday morning. They said the senator had passed away from a brief and sudden illness. They asked for prayers, and they asked for privacy during what they called an incredibly difficult period. That single guarded statement was all the public was given. There was no cause spelled out, no long explanation, nothing at all to fill the enormous silence it left behind. And you already know what happens when a famous man dies suddenly, and the official statement leaves a hole that wide open. People rush in to fill it themselves. The senator, who was rarely ever quiet, died in the quietest way anyone could imagine. And because the country was handed so little to hold on to, the rumors did not merely begin. They detonated across every feed in the country. Within hours, some of the loudest voices online were pointing straight at Moscow and Tehran. A prominent activist named Laura Loomer asked her enormous following, in plain and blunt words, whether Russia had just poisoned Lindsey Graham, and she demanded an investigation and a toxicology report immediately. You can understand exactly why the idea caught fire so fast, because the surface details line up in a way that feels almost too neat to ignore. Here was the single loudest supporter of crushing Russia, a man who had spent years hurling weapons and sanctions and hard words at Putin, and he dropped dead within a day of walking out of a Ukrainian war zone. The theory had fuel far beyond the timing alone. Only days earlier, at a funeral in Iran, threats had been aimed directly at Graham, along with Trump and other American hawks, with images showing their faces marked with targets beneath a warning that sooner or later their heads would roll. Months before that, a Russian ideologue had openly called for Graham to be flattened. So, when he died with no clear cause, a lot of people simply decided the coincidence was too large to swallow. Russian and Iranian state media did nothing to calm any of it, openly celebrating his death, with one broadcast sneering that he had been sent somewhere they were only too happy to name out loud. 4 separate law enforcement sources told CNN that there was no indication, at least so far, that Graham had died from anything unnatural or sinister. The local police were carrying out the same routine review they perform whenever anyone dies unexpectedly at home. The FBI director posted publicly that the Bureau was assisting, which set off another whole wave of suspicion, yet investigators quietly made clear that they had simply offered their help, not uncovered any crime. And then there is the detail that almost nobody screaming about poison actually wanted to hear. Graham had heart trouble running right through his own bloodline. His father died of a heart attack at the age of 69, and the emergency crews on that final night were fighting a cardiac arrest, not treating some mysterious foreign toxin. The simplest and saddest explanation had been sitting there in plain view the entire time. But even that ordinary explanation cracks open a door into something most people never knew about him, because the family history that may have taken his life is tied directly to the loneliest secret he carried. For all the noise and the tributes and the flags lowered to half-staff, the people grieving him hardest were never a wife and were never children, because there simply never were any. That absence was not an accident, and it was certainly not a punchline. It was the shape of a life that had been bent, very early and very hard, by loss. When Graham was barely 21, his mother died of cancer, And only about 15 months after that, his father died of the same heart trouble, leaving behind a young man and a frightened 13-year-old girl suddenly alone in a small South Carolina town with a struggling family business hanging over them. Most people that age would have run for the horizon. Graham did the exact opposite of running. He became a father to his own little sister. He took legal responsibility for her, and later he adopted her outright so that she could receive his military benefits. And he drove home again and again to keep the family stitched together while everything around them threatened to come apart. His sister has described him in words that cut so much deeper now as a brother, a father, and a mother, all rolled into one single person. That is not the story of a politician. When people spent decades quietly poking at his private life, wondering aloud why a man like him never married, he answered it in his own dry and disarming way, saying he never found the time to meet the right girl, and that the right girl was smart enough not to have any time for him. He turned a genuine ache into a joke, the way so many of us do when the honest answer is far too heavy for a soundbite. The truth living underneath that joke is that his whole capacity for family had already been spent, poured completely into the little sister he refused to ever let down. So, when a president stood on national television and said this man felt like family, and when world leaders said out loud that they had lost a beloved friend, it lands on you very differently once you understand all of that. Graham built a family out of pure wreckage and then handed that same fierce and protective loyalty to nearly everyone who let him get close. It is the real reason his death sliced clean across enemy lines, and it is the reason even the one man who once traded brutal insults with him could barely keep his voice steady on Sunday. Because the road from enemy to brother between Graham and Donald Trump is one of the strangest journeys in all of modern politics. People conveniently forget how ugly it started. Back in 2015, Graham looked directly into a camera and called Donald Trump a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. And he did not soften a word of it. He warned that nominating Trump would destroy his own party. And after the attack on the Capitol in 2021, he stood on the Senate floor sounding genuinely finished, saying, "Count me out, and enough is enough." If you had only ever watched those two moments, you would have sworn on your life that these men would despise each other until the day one of them died. Graham became one of Trump's closest and most trusted allies in all of Washington. He defended him when almost nobody else in the room was willing to. He became a golfing partner and a late-night phone friend, and he joked in that self-deprecating way that defined him that Trump was an awesome golfing buddy whom he had yet to actually beat. He even started calling himself the President's North Star on foreign policy, which is a remarkable thing for a former rival to say, out loud and truly mean. Trump himself said that Graham would probably be appreciated far more now than he ever was while he was still alive, which is a heartbreaking thing to realize about anyone, and a painfully easy thing to recognize if you have ever lost someone you argued with and loved anyway. And it was never only about Trump. Democrats who had fought him savagely for years lined up to mourn him too. One senator who had battled him across the aisle for a decade said there was no better friend and no tougher adversary anywhere in the building. The vice president admitted that the two of them disagreed constantly, and then confessed that he simply could not help liking the man. That is an incredibly rare thing to earn in a town built almost entirely on grudges. Graham somehow managed to be loved by the very people who were supposed to be his enemies. And that strange talent for reaching across the aisle was tied directly to the one fight he never got the chance to finish. The bitterest twist in this entire story is what was sitting unfinished on his desk the night he died. For more than a year, Graham had been pushing a sanctions package aimed at the countries quietly propping up Russia's war, a bill so aggressive that people had nicknamed it the sanctions from hell. He had spent that final trip to Kyiv, telling the world he had at last gotten the White House on board, that it was going to become law, and that the war itself might actually end because of it. He died genuinely believing he had won. He simply did not live long enough to see the vote called. Now his allies are treating that unfinished bill almost like a memorial. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, including the very Democrats who had worked shoulder to shoulder with him on it, have said the most fitting way to honor the man is to finally pass the thing he poured his last year of life into. His closing project may become law precisely because he is gone, which is a strange and hollow kind of victory. the kind that arrives far too late for the one person who wanted it more than anyone. If it does pass, it will carry his fingerprints straight across the ending of a war he swore he would help finish. There is also the empty chair he left behind him and the frantic scramble that always follows one. He had only just won his primary a few weeks earlier. He was actively running for another full term. And now his state suddenly has to find someone to fill a seat he had held for more than 20 years. He was only the third person to hold that seat in nearly 70 years, following a genuine giant of South Carolina politics before him. His own governor summed up the size of the hole with a single line, saying that we shall not see his likes again. And maybe that is the real truth Trump kept circling on Sunday morning, buried underneath all the shock and the heavy voice and the endlessly replayed phone call. Not a conspiracy, not a poison, not some grand and shadowy plot, but something far quieter and much harder for any of us to accept. The loudest man in Washington went completely silent in the space of a single evening, and the people he left behind are still trying to understand how a day that opened with so much promise could possibly end with sirens screaming on Capitol Hill. Do you believe there is something more to Lindsey Graham's sudden death than the country is being told? Or does the simplest and saddest answer feel like the honest one to you? Tell us in the comments.